The year was 1941. The air over Europe trembled with the roar of engines and the heavy march of armies. The Second World War had fastened its iron grip around nations, and every headline seemed to shout of blitzkriegs, sieges, and weapons that belonged more to nightmares than to reality. The skies for most were not a place of wonder, but a place of war. Where once people looked up for guidance or beauty, now they looked up in fear, searching for the silhouettes of bombers. But far from the noise and fury, in a quiet home in Virginia Beach, another kind of journey was about to begin. It would have no tanks, no borders, no armies. It would cross time itself. The man was Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. To those who knew him, he was both a healer of the body and a voice from some far-off place beyond the reach of ordinary thought. On this day, he prepared himself once more to leave the waking world behind. The blinds were drawn. The air in the small room was still, heavy with the faint scent of camphor. Cayce lay back on a plain couch, shoes off, hands loose by his sides. His breath slowed, deep, rhythmic, like the ocean tide pulling away from the shore. A stenographer sat nearby, pen poised above paper. She had seen this before the moment when his body remained here, but something else traveled far beyond it. Then it came. The first words, low and slow, as though pulled from some great depth. Yes, we have the body and the mind and the sole purpose. There was a stillness, almost reverent. But then the tone changed. A weight entered his voice, a gravity that made the stenographer lean forward, almost holding her breath. The signs of the times are not written in books, nor in the minds of men alone, but in the heavens. And in that day, from beyond the pathways of the planets, shall come a traveler unseen by man's machines, a wanderer of ice and fire, a messenger that was old when this world was young. The pen scratched furiously against paper, the sound loud in the quiet room. Mark it, the year will be in the 20 and 5 and 2000s, the 10th moon. The name will not be the name given at its birth, but the name men assign it when they find it crossing into the realm of the sun. It will appear as a sword in the sky, its tail stretching from horizon to horizon. It shall awaken the waters from beneath and shake the mountains from their sleep. Now, Cayce's mind was no longer in that small room. He was above the earth, far above, where the silence was not empty, but alive. And there, from the endless blackness, came a blue-white spear of light, cutting across the void. Its head glowed like molten silver, so bright it hurt to look at. From its heart streamed a vast tail, a robe of light, shimmering in shades of icy blue and ghostly white, swaying and curling as though it were alive. It moved with terrible grace. And there was sound, not wind, not engines, but a music unlike any the world had known. High, pure notes, like crystal touched by an unseen breath. It was beautiful, and it was unsettling. Below, the earth turned, cities glittering like scattered embers. But as the spear of light drew closer, something began to change. The lights in some places flickered, then went out. Not just street lamps, but entire regions swallowed by shadow. Cayce's sight drifted downward, past the clouds and over the waters, until it reached the restless skin of the earth itself. The seas were not behaving as they should. No wind whipped them, no storm drove them. And yet, the tides began to swell slow, deliberate, as if some deep, ancient reservoir within the planet had stirred. It was as though the Earth's own heart had been brushed by an invisible hand. Mountains trembled in lands where no quake had ever been known. Valleys shivered. The ground itself sighed. This was not the chaos of a world struck by stone from the heavens. No, this was stranger. It was as if the earth was adjusting, preparing, for the approach of something it could sense, but we could not. And in that trance state, Cayce heard the voice. The same calm presence that had spoken to him through countless visions, It did not speak to terrify. It spoke to warn. Before the comet came, there would be three great omens, signs written not in the stars, but in the bones of the earth. The first waters out of season, rains where deserts had forgotten their taste, floods over dry lands, while rivers, once roaring, shrank to thin, dying threads. Seasons would lose their rhythm. Farmers planting under cloudless skies, only to watch storms arrive too late or far too soon. Fields would wither or drown, and nations would wrestle to feed their own, as the soil betrayed them. The second, the quarrel of kings, the age of shouting across borders. The language of diplomacy would sour into the clashing of threats. Powerful nations speaking not as peacemakers, but as if daring the heavens themselves to intervene. The tension would rise until the world balanced on a single spark. The third, perhaps the most mysterious, the breaking of the shield. Cayce's voice spoke of the fire that dances in the air, a description that, to modern ears, sounds hauntingly like the wild light of geomagnetic storms, auroras not born of peace, but of a wounded sky, something natural or something we caused ourselves, would weaken the invisible armor that shields the earth from the sun's fiercest rage and from the silent radiation drifting through the universe. And then came the words that shivered like cold iron. The 10th moon, October. Cayce saw the comet's approach as a season, not a night. Astronomers, both seasoned and amateur, would watch as it grew night after night. It would not be the largest visitor the sky had ever seen, but its tail would glow unnervingly bright, twisting in ways that mocked the symmetry of the stars. At its peak, it would slide between the orbits of Earth and Mars. It would not strike us, but it would brush us. The Earth passing through its tail, baptized in cosmic dust. Some would gaze in wonder, families lying under the night sky, pointing, whispering, marveling. Others would feel the old fear rise again. Ancient prophecies pulled from shelves, read aloud in candlelight, and in high rooms of power, behind locked doors. There would be whispers of contingency plans, never meant to see the light of day. But Cayce's vision did not end there. Days after the comet's passing, the sun itself changed. In some places, the sky took on a strange golden tint, as if summer had died in a single breath, and autumn had stepped in uninvited. In others, the sun dimmed, a pale, struggling circle, trying to pierce the thickened air. It was not a blanket of darkness over the whole world. No, it came in patches, pockets, like the earth itself had been painted with shadow. In the dimmed regions, the fields withered, crops failed. The seasons no longer obeyed their old rhythm. Warm lands tasted the sharp bite of cold, while places once kissed by frost sweltered under an alien heat. The wind carried the faint tang of metal, and in the air hung strange whispers of illnesses moving like shadows, changing shape with the weather. Yet even in this unraveling, Edgar Cayce's trance visions spoke of something deeper, beyond the soil, beyond the sky, into the realm of the human heart. He saw what would happen after the comet's passing, not just the storms, not just the famine, but a dividing, a cleaving of humanity into two great camps. First, the fearful, those who would see only doom in the signs. They would hoard whatever they could clutch in trembling hands. They would bolt their doors, turn their backs on neighbors, see strangers not as souls, but as threats. Their fear would spread like wildfire, a contagion faster than any plague. And then the faithful. They would look upon the same sky, the same omens, but see in them a call to change. They would open their homes, share what little they had. They would pray together and choose humility over pride, gratitude over despair. They would remember survival without compassion is no survival at all. The comet itself, Cayce said, was not the destroyer. It was the mirror, a mirror that would reflect humanity's own moral state. If greed and violence still ruled the nations, its passing would be followed by tempests, famine, unrest, and what he called the Great Changes, a long season of upheaval. But if repentance had begun, if reconciliation was truly sought, then the comet's visit could be the first light of a new spiritual dawn. Know this, the trance voice warned. The heavens do not punish, they remind. The comet is not sent to destroy, but to awaken. No panic, no hysteria, only urgency. The fiery traveler was not a weapon, but a herald, a reminder that humanity's true safety has never been in walls or armies, but in the state of the soul. And in rare clarity, Cayce offered practical counsel. Keep stores of pure water and grains, he urged. But more than this, keep stores of goodwill with your neighbors. Do not flee your cities in blind panic. Strengthen the bonds where you stand, for fear will move faster than the fire in the sky. Mark the children with love and the knowledge of the Creator, for they will pass through the days ahead with lighter hearts than those who have forgotten. Then, as always, the vision ended. Cayce's voice slowed. His breathing shifted. He returned from the trance, unaware of the words he had spoken, but in his eyes there lingered a heaviness he could not name. 84 years later, we stand in the shadow of that vision. Astronomers now track an interstellar visitor, 3I/Atlas, a comet from beyond our solar system. It will sweep closest to the Sun on October 29, 2025, passing between Earth and Mars. Scientists call it a rare wonder. But in Virginia Beach, where Cayce once spoke, there are those who wonder something far more unsettling. Is this the fiery traveler he foresaw? If it is, then the question is not whether Earth will be struck, but whether humanity is ready to face the mirror it carries. Because if Cayce was right, the danger is not in the comet's fire. The danger is in what we will see in ourselves when it arrives. The records of Edgar Cayce's readings did not end with the comets passing in October of 2025. Even in trance, Cayce saw further beyond that fiery visitor's brief crossing of our skies. What he described was not a single, shattering event, but a slow, unsettling unfolding, a chain of moments linked like beads on a string, each pulling the next toward an inevitable conclusion. He spoke of a strange restlessness in the Earth itself, the invisible tether between our planet and the cosmos. The magnetism of the poles began to shift. Instruments grew confused. Compass needles wandered like lost travelers. Flights altered their paths in midair. And then the auroras came. No longer confined to the frozen ends of the world, they spilled into skies that had never known them. Brilliant curtains of alien light, as if the Earth herself had chosen to wear new robes. Some stood in awe. Others whispered that this was the breaking of the shield Cayce had warned of decades earlier, the quiet undoing of Earth's magnetic armor, our only defense against the raw fire of space. And in the stillness of night, people began to wake, not with illness, not with fear, but with an unshakable pressure in their minds, as though the rhythm of human thought itself had been touched by something beyond our world. It was in this strange season, Cayce said, that the great decision would begin. Urgent gatherings took place in every corner of the globe. Some were public, many were not. Leaders, scientists, and spiritual voices clashed behind closed doors, not over how to stop the comet, for it was already gone, but over how to respond to what its visit had awakened, because the comet had left more than dust in its wake. In the weeks after October 29th, 2025, the world grew strange. Fishermen swore that fish swam in patterns they had never seen. Entire schools turning in unison, as though obeying some invisible call. Birds altered their migrations, some flying straight into cities, dazed, confused, and silent. The weather, already unruly in the years before the comet, began to twist in ways no forecast could hold. Rains without clouds, droughts where rivers had flowed for centuries, and then there was the sea. Cayce had seen it a slow swelling, like a tide that no longer cared for the moon's pull. Coastal streets began to drown on calm, sunny days. Neighborhoods spoke of retreat. The ocean was coming without hurry and without mercy. The polar ice broke faster than science had dared to predict. Great slabs shattered into the water, their collapse echoing like distant thunder across the waves. But in Cayce's vision, these were not just physical disasters. They were symbols, the breaking of long frozen patterns, the crumbling of what mankind believed could never change. He warned the shifting of the poles would not come all at once. It would be preceded by signs, subtle but undeniable. New climate zones, animals abandoning old paths, auroras spilling into skies unprepared for their beauty. And through it all, Cayce reminded, the Earth's upheaval was the mirror of humanity's own inner disarray. Yet he saw hope, for alongside the fearful and the faithful, a third kind of people would rise. He called them the awakened. They were not perfect, not holy, but they had lived half asleep, until the comet's passing shattered their walls. Something in that blazing messenger from beyond stirred them in ways they did not expect. They began to question not with despair, but with hunger, not for the kind of knowledge that simply measures stars or maps oceans, but for the deeper order, the why behind the chaos. They asked, why now? Why had this messenger come to us in this hour of history? Among the awakened, Cayce saw the first seeds of the renewal. They were not presidents, not generals, not captains of industry. They were teachers, healers, farmers, makers of small things that mattered. They rebuilt their communities with foundations of trust, not profit. They shared food freely, resolved disputes without greed, made decisions for the sake of the weakest among them, and their strength was not in walls, but in bonds. Meanwhile, the fearful hid behind fortresses, hoarding wealth, guarding it with iron and fire. But Cayce saw their walls were brittle, their fear a poison. The faithful stood between the worlds, reminding the frightened that generosity is strength, and the awakened that renewal without spirit will collapse into the same mistakes as before. But the sky was not done speaking. Cayce described a second light. Not long after the comet's passing, another messenger appeared, smaller, quieter, persistent. Scientists would call it a minor object, a distant asteroid, perhaps. But those who remembered his words knew better. He had said, "When the first messenger has gone, another shall come, not to warn, but to witness." And then came the turning point, a winter unlike any the earth had known. Some lands saw December flowers bloom under a sun too warm. Others, long kissed by gentle winters, found themselves buried under snowdrifts taller than men. The winds carried the salt of the sea far inland, and the seasons lost their boundaries. And this Cayce said, was only the beginning. It was in that strange winter that something began to stir within the human soul. Not a whisper, not a murmur, but an awakening. At first, it was just a few, then a few hundred, then millions. They began to look at one another differently. Their conversations shifted from how do we survive to how do we live rightly. Across languages, across oceans, across borders, a single thread began to weave through human hearts. A knowing, a quiet certainty that all of these changes were not random accidents of fate, but part of a vast and ancient pattern. And that somehow humanity had a role to play in it. In one of his trance visions, Edgar Cayce's voice came as if from a far shore. He spoke of a choice that every man, every woman, every child would face in these days. It was not a choice made in government halls, not in palaces, nor in war rooms, but in the silent chambers of the human heart. Two paths lay before us, one the collapse of fear, the other the renewal of faith. He warned that the signs in the sky, the rising seas, the shifting magnet of the earth would intensify, and they would keep intensifying until the choice was made. If unity was chosen, the earth itself would respond. The magnetic field would steady. The climate, though forever altered, would find a new balance, and humanity would enter what Cayce called a 1,000-year light, an age of peace, an age of creativity. But if division prevailed, the upheavals would not end. The poles would tilt more violently. The seas would consume the coasts, and nations would split apart under their own weight. Then Cayce's voice whispered, "The comet is the question. Humanity's answer will write the years that follow." In his final words on the matter, he made no promise, no guarantee of which path we would choose. Only a single, unshakable truth, that without spiritual renewal, without unity, humanity could not endure the coming judgment of the cosmos. As the seasons passed from that strange winter, Cayce's vision seemed to cross a threshold. It no longer felt like prediction. It felt like unveiling, as if a great curtain had been drawn back, and before him lay the vast stage of Earth's destiny. He spoke of something he called the Great Tilt. It would not come like the snap of a twig, not in a single, roaring day of catastrophe. No, it would arrive like a thief in the night, in small, almost unnoticeable increments. A shift here, a tremor there, a storm that seemed oddly out of place, a drought where rain had always been faithful. Slowly, over years, the balance of the Earth's axis would lean, then lean again, and humanity would begin to feel the strange change in the very rhythm of the days. The sun's path would alter. Shadows at noon would point in unfamiliar directions. Navigation charts would need rewriting, and the stars, though still burning in their eternal places, would meet the horizon in ways that unsettled even the oldest mariners. Cayce warned that this subtle breaking of heaven's rhythm would shake the human mind in ways far deeper than most could imagine. For mankind had always walked to the steady heartbeat of the sky, and to lose that heartbeat was to lose a part of ourselves. And yet, in the middle of this celestial unsteadiness, Cayce saw something extraordinary, a flowering. All over the earth, small gatherings began to form, not to barter, not to seize power, but to remember. They told stories not just of what the world had been before the comet, before the strange seasons, before the poles began to sway, but of truths older than empire, older than money, that the earth was not owned, that water was a shared gift, that life was a web of care, not a ladder of competition. The awakened, once scattered and alone, began to recognize each other, not by symbols, not by slogans, but by the light in their manner. They moved through the world with a calm that was not denial, but clarity. In the markets they gave before they took. In disputes they listened before they spoke. In hardship they acted before they complained. Even those still gripped by fear found themselves strangely drawn to this quiet courage. Something in it awakened old memories. Memories of a time when their own hearts had been open. Then came the test. It did not come as a single towering wave, but as a slow, unstoppable climb of the seas. Inch by inch, the water crept into the edges of the world. Ancient buildings at the water's edge found their very foundations drowning. Salt water bled into freshwater rivers. Once green fields turned brackish and bitter. Some governments built walls. Others abandoned their coasts and fled inland. And here, the choice Cayce had spoken of became clear. Migrations born of fear bred only conflict. But migrations born of unity became almost miraculous, the weaving of strangers into new families, new communities. The old words from Cayce's 1941 reading echoed again. Keep stores of goodwill among your neighbors. In the slow flood, goodwill proved more precious than gold. But not all chose well. There were places where leaders clung to old rivalries, where resources were hoarded, where walls bristled with weapons. These places, Cayce said, were like withered branches, still holding their shape for a time, but destined to crumble. The awakened, in contrast, did not cling. They adapted. They farmed salt-tolerant crops. They drew water from the air. They built floating gardens that rose and fell with the tide. They did not see the changing earth as only a loss, but as an invitation to live differently. And it was then that Cayce's voice returned to the vision of the 1,000-year light. This was no metaphor. It was as real as the turning of the earth. The light he spoke of was not only the sun's, but a quality in the air itself, a gentleness. That came when the storms of human greed had finally passed. The earth had found a new balance, and so had humanity. In that time, old sicknesses faded, not by miracle, but because the way of living no longer fed them. Food was grown in harmony with the land, not in defiance of it. Waters ran clear because no hand poisoned them for profit. The weather still shifted, but now it shifted like a friend, not an enemy. And so, the strange winter gave way to something far greater. The question had been asked. The answer was being written still, not by the few in power, but by the countless unseen, quiet choices of the human heart. It was not a world without sorrow. People still died. Storms still came. But sorrow was no longer multiplied by the cruelty of man toward man. Cayce saw children born into this new age, children who carried no shadow of the fear their grandparents once knew. They looked at the sky and did not wonder if the heavens were against them. Instead, they saw in the stars the same light they saw in the eyes of those who loved them. The light of this age was not only in the heavens, it was in the mind. Knowledge no longer hidden behind locked archives, no longer guarded by the gatekeepers of power, but shared freely, not as a privilege, but as a birthright. And with that sharing came an age unlike any before, a blossoming of invention, of art, of understanding, a world that the old age could scarcely have imagined. But Cayce stressed one thing: the 1,000-year light was not inevitable. It was a path, not a promise. And that path would be chosen in the years immediately after the comet's passing. Those years, he said, would be the crucible in which humanity's future was forged. He warned it would be easy to blame the comet for what was to come. The rising seas, the shifting poles, the restless skies. But to do so would be to miss the truth entirely. The comet was the signpost, not the road. The heavens do not punish, they remind. The traveler is not sent to break, but to awaken. The judgment is not from the stars, but from the heart of man. And the sentence is written by his own hand. He spoke of a truth that would outlast any comet, any shifting of poles, any rising of seas. That unity, born of compassion, was the only defense worth building. Armies could not hold back the turning of the earth. Fortresses could not turn away the tide. But a people bound by mutual care could withstand any change. For their strength would not be in walls, but in the will to stand together. And then, as though speaking directly to us, here, in the shadow of 2025, his words came like a seal upon the vision. Live as though the Lord himself were walking beside you, for in truth he is. And when the fire passes over the sky, let no man's heart be in fear. The fear is worse than the fire. Walk in the light, and the light shall walk in you. The room in Virginia Beach fell still. His breathing slowed, changed, and then quickened again. When he opened his eyes, he looked as if he had woken from a dream he could almost remember. The stenographer, pen trembling in her hand, looked at the pages she had filled. She knew even then that the words would outlive them both. Now, October 29th, 2025 draws near. Astronomers speak of Comet 3, I/Atlas with curiosity and awe. To most, it is simply a beautiful stranger passing through our skies. But for those who remember the 1941 reading, the question is not whether the comet will pass, but how we will stand when it does. Will we meet it as the fearful, hoarding and dividing? Will we meet it as the faithful, steady in trust and care? Or will we rise as the awakened, seeing in its light the call to begin again? For in the end, the comet's true fire is not in its tail. It is in the hearts it ignites. And that fire, once lit, can burn for 1,000 years.